The IP portfolio developed over that 7+ year period when nobody was really focused on the top of the stack. It gave us the privilege to develop IP that is going to be really important for the space.
The ceasing operations day in 2024. I mean, what does that look like for a leader? Zapata's back. You might recall some of the headlines about how they tried an AI pivot and eventually shut down in 2024. What followed was an outpouring of support from the industry as we rooted for the affected people and the impressive technology, which seeks to make coding quantum computers better. Find out about the amazing fall and rise in this episode of the post-quantum world. I'm your host, Konstantinos Karagiannis. I lead quantum computing services at Protiviti, where we're helping companies prepare for the benefits and threats of this exploding field. I hope you'll join each episode as we explore the technology and business impacts of this post-quantum era. Our guest today is the CEO of Zapata Quantum, Sumit Kapur. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Konstantinos. I'm really excited to be here. It's been a great ride we've had recently, and I'm excited to tell people about it.
Yeah, this is almost the interview that couldn't happen, but now it can. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Zapata, in one form or another, started in a Harvard lab 9 years ago with a pure quantum mission. So when you look back at those early days, what was the North Star that the team was chasing? And does that same star guide the company today?
Yes, it's a fantastic question. At the end of the day, the way that we think about our company, and we're really structured about this, is we think about our why, our what, and our how. And we'll talk a little bit more about our what, the solution and how the solution actually is applied. But this is really about our why. And the why has always been about translating and unlocking the immense potential that quantum computing has and applying it to real world applications. And we believed then and believe now that organizations can create incredible durable advantage by investing in that application development and investing in that application development ahead of the hardware actually being at the ultimate end stage, because there's going to be an evolutionary path on the hardware side, but we just need to make sure that the software side is keeping up. And alongside that is an idea that we still believe and believe even more than ever now. We believed then that quantum application development would be very hard, and in fact harder than most would have thought. Here we are 7-8 years later after the inception of Harvard's quantum computing lab, and we've done work with folks like DARPA, where we were lucky enough to be chosen to lead all 3 technical areas of the landmark quantum benchmarking program. And really those technical areas transcended all the layers of the stack, from the application layer and the utility down to the algorithm, and then down to the hardware specification. And we did that for multiple high value domains. And what we learned is that fundamental premise that we had, that quantum application development is harder than most people think, it was even harder than we thought. And so our why has actually advanced in the sense that we know that we're more needed than ever. And I think that this is actually, what's incredible is that right now, this same idea is being emphasized and highlighted by the rest of the industry. There was a Google paper that actually came out called The Grand Challenge of Quantum Applications. And this was just a month and a half ago. This is in December of 2025. And the paper makes the point that right now we're seeing systemic underinvestment at the top of the stack, the area that we're talking about, the application development area. And I can talk a little bit more later about why that is, but really our why, our desire to unlock the potential of quantum computing by connecting algorithms to applications, by creating the solutions for these use cases, is as ever our North Star. And we think we have even greater conviction, and I think the industry has even greater conviction around it today than when we started.
Yeah, that's great. You touched on a lot of the things that we're going to dig into. And it was interesting to see so many people in the industry just pulling for you guys in multiple ways, and then we'll talk about some of that. So I agree too. I mean, that stack is super important. And I think the coding layer couldn't be more important because
Yes.
what are we going to do with these things? Yeah, they're cold, they're fault tolerant. What are we going to do with them? So
Totally,
that's it.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Right now, I mean, we're in a situation where it's actually highly critical. If it's critical for the industry. If we don't find the uses, then quantum computing is going to remain hype. And we think that it's not going to remain hype, but it's going to take some work.
Yeah. So we're going to start talking a little bit about some of the turmoil along the way gradually. You transitioned from CFO to CEO during one of the most complex restructurings in the industry. So what was that internal light bulb moment where you realized that Zapata's story wasn't over, but was actually just beginning a new chapter?
It was this has been the most significant career journey of my life. I'll tell you that this is not a new story for me. Just to give you a little bit of background, my prior career journey before Zapata was at a company called 3 Degrees, which is a machine learning platform in the environmental commodities space. And when I joined that company, yeah, I was there for about a decade. And when I joined that company, the company was in some distress, and it had about $5 million of revenue. And I came in as CFO of that company and tried to do what we could to fix some balance sheet situations that the company had and to leverage some core technology and build on that core technology, namely the machine learning engine that allowed us to become ultimately the 800-pound gorilla in that space. So, my journey there started at 5 million of revenue and it grew to $1 billion in revenue over 10 years. And so it was a wonderful hyper scaling, everything I'd want out of a career journey. When I joined Zapata, I said, hey, look, these guys are around $5 million in revenue. It looks like there's a little bit of distress there, and maybe I can do the same thing there that I was able to, help do at 3 Degrees. Unfortunately, the Zapata story was a little bit more challenging, and I think that it's worth saying that first of all, the SPAC dynamic hasn't treated a lot of companies well, and that's really something that we fell victim to as well. So what ended up happening is we in 2023 made the decision to merge with this SPAC entity and go public via SPAC. And two things happened as part of that. One, we pivoted into AI because that SPAC was focused on AI. And so we pivoted into quote unquote quantum inspired AI. And the second thing is we were hoping to get a great deal of equity capital out of that transaction. The pivot into AI didn't work very well for us. There were some things we learned out of it, but it didn't work very well for us. It's not something that we were well differentiated in. And on the balance sheet side, we didn't get the great deal of equity capital. In fact, we got almost nothing, and we brought in $20+ million of unsecured liabilities to a wide variety of folks. And that's not strange for SPACs, unfortunately. And so I joined in May of 2024, shortly after the DSPAC transaction. The stock had already traded down from $10 to about $1, and tried to do what I could, and as with the rest of everybody there, to see if we could right the ship, but we couldn't, and the plane ultimately went down. And so that was kind of the origin of what happened when the plane went down. Your question was really, how did you realize that there was there was enough parts on the airstrip to put the plane back together and then get it flying again?
Yeah.
And really, there were a lot of moments there. One is, first of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that the macro timing component was not in our favor the first time. I think for a lot of companies in the quantum space, we entered into a bit of a quantum winter for a period, and it
Because
was
of
harder.
AI, ironically.
Yeah, 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 totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. And then there was this wave of technical progress started with the Willow announcement from Google and Microsoft declaring 2025 the year of quantum readiness, and then a series of other announcements, which ultimately resulted in some really interesting folks on the quantum side. I was just at the Q2B conference where Scott Aronson spoke, and he made the statement that we'll have a fault-tolerant computer running Shor's algorithm before the next presidential election. Now, he said that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because he thought, hey, maybe the presidential election will be delayed for some reason. But in any case, he was previously more skeptical, and a lot of folks in the industry were. And so the technological progress unlocked a timing moment for us, right? So that's one ingredient that made me and some of the others realize that, hey, there's something to do here. The second is, in talking to folks around the industry, there was a lot of goodwill. That's for Zapata.
Yes.
There was just a ton, and
I was so
people
impressed
were
to see it. Yeah, it was
right.
really nice. It was
And
heartwarming.
it
Yeah.
was so
Yeah.
heartwarming for me too. And I
Yeah.
and I hadn't even been at the company for very long. So, for me, I had heard that we had a good bit of goodwill, but it was incredible for me to see it firsthand. And so, it was clear that we had a niche to fill and people were looking for somebody to fill that niche. And then I guess third, there was just a lot of assets that we held. The IP portfolio, the more we looked at it, I mean, it's an incredible IP portfolio developed over that 7+ year period when nobody was really focused on the top part of the stack. So it gave us the privilege to develop some IP that is going to be really important for the space. The portfolio of papers that are really significant peer-reviewed scientific papers that document the portfolio of experience that we have. So all of these things, started coming together where it was like, hey, there's a lot here, and it would be a shame to let this all go. And so there was enough raw material to work with to at least, in the end of 2025, in the end of 2024, beginning of 2025, to at least try. And it took some doing, but that's where we started.
So, do you feel that if you look at companies like, let's say, Classic, they're using AI to optimize coding,
Hmm.
so having AI do the quantum coding for you, and some other companies are experimenting with that too. Do you think that Zapata was like a year or two too early to the whole quantum AI idea? Is that the general idea?
We may have been a year or two too early. Yeah, we may have been a year or two too early. The thing is that some of these other companies were around for a bit too. At the end of the day, you only have a limited amount of runway.
Mhm.
And so, it just, these things, the timing is so hard to predict. We may have been, it might have been that we were the perfect time, but then we didn't have quite enough runway to make it, or, somehow the SPAC transaction, for example, just didn't work out in our favor. There was things that happened that just didn't work out in our favor. And, we might have been too early, but the good news is I think we're really well timed now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's funny when you guys switched to Zapata AI. First time I saw it, I was like, "What's happening here? Whoa, what is this?" And then I was like, "Well, when I started this show now almost 5 years ago, I called it the post quantum world right away. That's throwing a dagger in the ground, right? Like we're
Right,
post quantum way back then." So
right.
yeah, so I kind of respect it. I'm like, cool, all right, cool.
Yep,
Let's push for it.
totally, totally.
And then
Yeah, yeah,
since it
yeah,
was
yeah.
nice to see, newsletters and things, I think IQT newsletter, they would like at the end of it write, oh, folks from Zapata who are looking for jobs, that kind of thing. They were just kind of supporting the community. So I really like that because it is still small and growing,
Yep,
the
yep.
community in general.
It
So
is
what did
totally.
that day look like? I mean, the ceasing operations day in 2024. I mean, what does that look like for a leader? What's that day like?
It was not a pretty day. We had, we'd kind of, obviously seen things, seen that it was coming. We, had taken every shot we could to try to save this thing. And unfortunately, it was just, we got together, with the leadership and the board, and we made that difficult decision that we just couldn't continue going on. We just didn't have the resources to do it. I think that the the board and the leadership wanted to do its best to try to support folks in their journey afterwards, and we did what we could there. If I'm perfectly honest, I think we could have, had we seen things coming earlier, maybe we could have done, a better job of navigating that situation upon, some really honest self-reflection. And I think that, maybe we grew through that. I think it was a family. The problem is it
Mhm.
was, not the problem. It was such a close knit family that we had, and we were so reluctant to let go of our chances of succeeding. So it was the most difficult career day of my life, I'd say. Just when we had to tell everybody and have to ask people to find other journeys. It was sad.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that honesty. Thank you.
Hmm.
And then you managed to restructure over $18 million in debt. and
Hmm.
and somehow, what was your pitch? I mean, how'd you get investors to believe in Zapata 2.0? Like, how'd you get them to believe in that reboot?
Well, very slowly, very slowly. I think that what ended up happening is that it was a bit of a flywheel where we would talk to some party that might be a potential investor that would bring some degree of credibility to the equation. And they would say, hey, we could be interested if you can get some other guys to be interested, if you can get some, conversion on the balance sheet side. And so then I was able to go to some of the folks on the balance sheet side and say, hey, I think I can get some financing, and I could get it from some really credible parties. And so there might be some movement here. And they're like, well, maybe, but you're going to have to really de-risk the situation further and get, more conviction around the amount of investment and more conviction around the amount of restructuring that has to happen here. And then, that we made a little bit further progress there. Then the whole time we were, recreating the business vision of the company, and we made some really key kind of decisions about the direction that we wanted to go, and we were able to convey with a degree of great clarity the gap in the space that was emerging, and we were able to find people in the space who had enough credibility that they could say, hey, what these guys are saying is truly right. There is this gap in the space. We further got some folks that would be able to take a look at the IP, namely a major global consultancy, and they were able to come in and back us on the fact that the IP was incredibly valuable. And so I think it was kind of like a bit of a slow effort where we had to get a building consensus. And once we did get all these different people aboard, then it started to crescendo into a bit of a wave. So it was a lot of conversations. I'll tell you that much.
Did the naming rebranding have anything to do with the convincing process? Was it part of it, like saying it's going to be Zapata Quantum? Like, did that have something to do with that final push? Or
Well, I mean, there was always the idea that we were going to rename it to something not AI. There was always that idea. But yeah, I mean, I think that the actual name, we were pretty convinced that we wanted to keep the Zapata piece, and then we obviously were convinced that it had to be quantum. So it was hard to
oh yeah,
find something. It was
kind of
pretty clear.
inevitable then.
Yeah, yeah, that was kind of inevitable. But yeah, I think that folks, I mean, that's a piece of the story right there. It's like, look, we know that the Zapata name conveys enough goodwill that we want to keep it. And we know that the quantum space needs us. So those two elements of the story are embodied in the name right there.
Mhm. So I'd like to shift a little bit to one of the major things you do, and you were able to secure global patents for quantum intermediate representation (QIR).
Mhm.
So if you could just like explain to our audience, I mean, you kind of already hinted at pieces of it in the stack discussion earlier, but why is this universal translator so critical for the next stage of quantum utility?
Absolutely. So I think that at the end of the day, something that really needs to be understood is that for quantum applications, more so than even in classical space, quantum applications are going to be running on a combination of QPUs, GPUs, and CPUs, because you're not going to be doing universal computation on a quantum computer just because it's going to be more expensive than doing flow control for applications, for example, on a CPU. And when you're doing things like, machine learning or various other AI type methods, you're probably going to be doing those on GPUs. So you wouldn't need to use QPUs for that, which isn't to say that the QPUs won't be incredibly valuable for particular parts of the routine. And so because you have this complexity of needing to coordinate multiple different hardware paradigms at the bottom layer and coordinate those paradigms and connect them to human readable code at the very top layer, it creates the need for multiple layers of translation and coordination. And so this is a kind of a well-trodden path in terms of the kind of the way this kind of translation layer happens in other paradigms. And so in quantum space is just even more important. And so we've done that in the form of quantum intermediate representation, and we think that it's really important for the space, and it's an idea that other people are adopting as well. So we think that it's going to be really critical that we get this solution out there in order to make quantum computing and hybrid computing really efficient going forward.
Now, is the idea to have that work with agnostically across modalities to make sure that no matter what backend system you're running on, it'll enable that, whether it's an annealer or trapped ion or, whatever.
Yes, yes, yeah. It would definitely be cross-architecture, hardware agnostic. That's the whole idea, is that that you would be able to compile across multiple different hardware paradigms and be able to translate from the top layer and abstract all that complexity away. And without that, that complexity remains, and it makes things much less efficient than it would be otherwise.
So it might need some tweaking and tooling based on modality, right? To make sure you're getting the absolute best translation for performance.
Yes,
Because as we're
yes,
seeing, when you
absolutely.
go down the stack, it gets messy, right?
It
You start
does.
to
Yeah,
lose
yeah. Oh, you're
gains.
definitely, and that's the whole purpose, is to
Yeah.
be able to do that, to be able to abstract that complexity away from the people at the top layer who can then, be free to code in an abstract kind of human readable form that doesn't need to be dependent on all these.
And somewhat ironically, will AI then enter that process as like a coding agent maybe this year?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Look, I think that we do believe that AI is going to be a key part of the solution going forward, and everybody believes that.
Oh,
We
of
know
course.
that,
Mhm.
and so yeah, so it's not only that AI is going to represent one of the hardware paradigms at the bottom, but it's also that AI will represent an ability to help us translate as part of the universal translator and create the applications at the top layer. So, I think that some of our experience on the AI side with Zapata is going to help us to be able to bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, people are expecting that, I think, in the future when you go build a workload, cloud, whatever, and you start to select what pieces, eventually people are going to just want to say, just pick what you need and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
tell
yeah.
me that's
Yep,
what they're hoping for, I believe.
yep.
So how did working with DARPA across the benchmarking initiative, how did that shape the software you're building today? Did they have like particular technical feedback or anything like that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so interesting. We actually have a kind of a flow chart on our website that really talks us through the entire process.
Hmm.
And really, we were able to, with DARPA, go end to end on multiple really high value domains. And so, for example, in quantum chemistry, homogeneous catalysis, in simulation, there was computational fluid dynamics, and we did it with papers for folks like BP and BASF alongside the DARPA work. And so really what we ended up doing was very arduous and labor intensive work to prove out solutions to particular problems and create the kind of simulation of the application which creates the resource estimate for these particular problems. The problem ended up being was that it was very inefficient. I mean, it took a lot of work to be able to do this. And so we need to do that much more efficiently. And so I think that really the DARPA work helped inform the pathway and really solidify for us the need to be able to move much more quickly. If we're going to be drinking through a straw the way we're doing right now and trying to drink up all of the different potential applications of quantum computing, that straw is never going to be able to empty out this leaky sieve that we have to remove all the liquid from, because it's just the flow isn't there, and the liquid in the container is constantly changing as well. So we need to expand the size of that straw significantly. And I think the DARPA work that we did made us realize that that's going to be the most important thing that we can bring to the industry.
So it's all about getting some kind of advantage ultimately, and hardware is picking up pace. We're going to pass 50 logical qubits, I'm sure, across multiple systems soon this year.
Mhm.
So what do you feel would be the most immediate return on investment that an enterprise could get right now, but with any kind of hybrid approach, even, the ultimate combination of the hardware we have and all the classical techniques?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're talking about presumably like just a general enterprise, like what would they do?
Yeah, like, what's your
Yeah.
gut tell you that when you tweak everything and improve this straw,
Yep.
what are we most likely gonna see the best return on investment?
Like which domain?
Yeah, it could be an industry you feel,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess obviously, like the very near term is the quantum native stuff. The quantum native stuff being quantum chemistry
Mhm.
and condensed matter physics. I mean, those are kind of like the things that I think Feynman had in mind when he proposed quantum computing to begin
Absolutely.
with. And
Yep.
so
Way
that's
back, yeah.
yeah, totally. So the obvious thing is that it's those native applications that are going to be the near term big value adds, along with one non-native application, and that's Shor's, right? Which is basically that is a case where you've actually mapped a problem that is not a quantum mechanics problem, it's an arithmetic problem, and you've mapped that problem onto physics in order to arrive at a solution. So that bucket, right? Basically, quantum chemistry, condensed matter physics, and Shor's are the very near term stuff. And then the longer term stuff is, the optimization, simulation, machine learning, and there's so many different things in that bucket. And those are things that where you're actually mapping, other problems that are, whether it's financial simulation or machine learning or, logistics optimization, network optimization, whatever. That's just mapping all of those onto physics, right? So those are, I think, a little bit trailing, right?
Mhm.
Versus the native side. So that's, I'd say, the kind of near term, which I don't know if that's exactly the answer to your question, but that's kind of the way we view it in terms of domain progression.
Yeah, what's really interesting is you're not the first person within the last few months to hint that Shore might be one of the first things we do.
Right.
And I mean, I can't stress for listeners how bizarre that is, right? Just a couple of years ago, we swore that was the really, really far away thing.
Right.
And there would be 100 use cases before we're cracking encryption. And now everyone's basically admitting, no, I think Aronson was right that and so was the CEO of IonQ when he said that we're at this point now, I guess, 9 quarters away
Right.
from cracking encryption. It's
That's amazing. Yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
just wanted to highlight that. Like, Shore keeps coming up as, yeah, that might be the first thing we do. Just
Yep.
that little tiny thing, destroy everything.
Destroy
Just
everything.
that little, yeah, just something small and cute like that.
Right. 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 Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That'll happen by, let's say, 2029. So if we're sitting here in 2030,
Hmm.
we've already took care of PQC, hopefully, and we're not too worried about Shore. What's the one problem that you think Zapata Quantum has solved that changed the world for the better around then?
Yeah.
Let's say around
Yeah, yeah,
20.
yeah. Well, our answer to that is pretty clear. I think it is, for us, it's really about solving the problem of quantum application intelligence,
Mhm.
and it's really being able to give organizations a clear idea of which problems are the most quantum amenable for them, how exactly you would solve those problems, what algorithms would be used, and then when exactly they should be investing in those. And so, really being able to give them a really clear idea of their path in quantum is going to be is what we are looking to do. There's some interesting statistics out there. There's the McKinsey statistic. I think that the total amount of value creation in quantum by 2035 will be $1 to $2 trillion. And so there's a lot at stake. And then there's, I believe, a BCG statistic, which is the idea that 90% of that value will go to 10% of the early movers. And so I think that we're in a bit of an arms race where organizations, enterprises are going to be racing to be able to prove out their approach and to be able to, actually leverage this technology. Obviously, we have an intercontinental arms race with, Europe versus Asia versus the US kind of vying for the lead. And so and then you've got the technological arms race on the hardware side. Everybody kind of vying for the winning hardware paradigm. So you've got these multiple arms races, but I think that what we're doing is the arms race as it relates to helping the organizations to understand what applications are really going to be the ones that work for them. And I will say one other thing that I thought was a really cool quote, and I think that it was John Preskill that said this at one of the conferences recently, and I really liked it. Was a quote from John von Neumann that came out sometime around the advent of the digital computer in whatever, something like the 50s or something like that. And he said the most important problems that we will be solving with computers are likely to be the ones that we're least able to predict today, because those will be the ones that are so far afield from what is now feasible. Because the truth is that you don't want to just solve something and make it incrementally better. You want to do something completely new and novel. And von Neumann couldn't have possibly predicted, he wouldn't have predicted that we'd be using the computer to do what we're doing today with all the media and
Yeah.
everything that we're doing literally now. So it's the work that we're talking about, the quantum application intelligence, is to be able to enable that exploration of what high value add problems and domains would be potentially quantum amenable that people might not be thinking about and be able to move through that exploration process with a greater efficiency and clarity.
Yeah, when you brought up the McKinsey and BCG numbers, my first thought was kind of analogous to what you just said. I'm not entirely sure they can predict what the
Mhm.
use cases will be in 10 years. You know,
Totally.
we
Totally.
might be trying, it might be like trying to predict where quantum is going if you did the same experiment before we had GPT and the transformer. You know,
Hmm.
it might be like
Hmm.
trying to predict where AI is going to go before the transformer paper. And then all of a sudden the
Totally.
transformer paper appears, and then like all those projections are wonky. So I
Yep.
think we might be in the same situation right now. Who knows? It could be even bigger than that.
Yeah. 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 Totally.
Yeah, so
Totally.
that was a
Yeah.
great quote to end on, and I think von Neumann unfortunately will now not have his architecture be as prominent, right? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we'll need a new name for the architecture after someone.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I vote Deutsch, and thank you so much for coming on. I genuinely mean it when I say welcome back. I really was excited to see you guys come back up.
Thank you, thank you. It just means so much that the industry and the community is supporting us. And honestly, I think that one thing that's at the core of our kind of ethos is that this is a really difficult problem to tackle,
Mhm.
and we're going to have to do it together. The fact that this industry kind of pulls together in a lot of ways, like the support of Zapata, is really encouraging and uplifting.
That does it for this episode. Thanks to Sumit Kapur for joining to discuss Zapata Quantum. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to Protivity's The Post-Quantum World, and maybe leave a review to help others find us. Be sure to follow me on all socials at Constant Hacker. That's Constant with a K, Hacker. You'll find links there to what we're doing in quantum computing services at Protivity. You can also DM me questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear on the show. For more information on our quantum services, check out Protivity.com or follow Protivity Tech on X and LinkedIn. Until next time, be kind and stay quantum curious.